Welcome everyone to the Abez Show, where today I have a very special guest, someone I met who actually worked very close by location to our accelerator when we had one of our accelerators running. And then we hit it off. And I think we brought him in on one of my shows, and then he brought me in on his show, and now I'm bringing him back to my solo show. Ammar, how are you?
Oh, thank you very much for having me on the show. I'm great and hope you're doing great.
It's always a pleasure to see you. So, Ammar, please tell me more about what you do and tell me more about you.
I'm an entrepreneur, founder and CEO of Finalrentals.com, which is the largest car rental marketplace in the UAE. And before launching Final Rentals, I've worked with companies like Budget, Thrifty, Dollar, Europe Car, you name it, and I've worked with them for over 12 years. And while I was working with those companies as a chief software architect, I came to know the background story, the customer's pain points, and that's how I launched Final Rentals. And it's been 4 years. It's a growing startup, and I'm happy, running it. And so far, all good.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. So I think you tackled something that I can tell you in full disclosure. My brother tried to do the same thing as well, not because of anything, because he was heading up the motors section in Diviso. So
Right. Okay.
he got a lot interested at that time with the whole car rental space, and it's a very
Yeah.
cool big space, but I think it's very fragmented, and I think it's nice that you have actually found the pain point and actually, you know, build something that addresses that. So tell me more about, your day to day. Tell me more about Final Rentals. I know you're expanding right now, so tell me more about that. That sounds very exciting.
So if you look at UAE as a market, right, for car rentals, it's a market like no other because expats rent cars here and also the tourists, they are also renting cars, right? So it's a country of more than 1,000 car rental companies. It's like, as you said, it's a huge market, highly fragmented, saturated. And if you search on Google rent a car in Dubai, you will find at least 40 companies spending to be on that first page of Google
Oh,
for
wow.
that keyword. So it is a crazy, industry, when it comes to car rentals. So while I was, working as a software architect with companies like Budget, Thrifty, Dollar, I realized that this industry is amazing. It's a very old industry, very traditional, almost 200 years old, and it hasn't changed. If you look at the backside of it, if you look at behind the website or behind the app,
Yeah.
everything runs the same way how it was running in 1960s or even 1920s. So I always used to think that how this can be changed or who's going to change it. And that's how I launched Final Rentals in December 2016, right? And when I launched the startup, it was something new for me, but I didn't see it coming. I thought it was just another business that I was doing before. I was working as a consultant. I had a great income every month. And then when I started as a startup, in 1 year time, Abe, I was bankrupt. Like I was down to my last $5,000. And then I rebuilt Final Rentals, from there. So it has been a very, I would say, interesting journey learning. You learn every single day, literally from the ground up. So I would say resurrected it from the ground up, right? What you see today as Final Rentals. And then came the pandemic. Thank you very much. From March till August, there are 100%, let's say, locations are off. They're down to zero cars, defleeted. And then I realized, what can I do again to reinvent this business model, right? And now Final Rentals is actually a franchise. So we are actually franchising it. We already have the franchisees in Malta, Ireland, Cyprus. For some reason, Icelandic countries like me more than the normal countries. And we are now expanding in Turkey, Poland. So now I see it as the world's first ever digital company to be franchised.
Oh, wow.
So if you look at Hertz, Dollar, Thrifty, they have their own cars. They have an operation. So I'll be the first car rental company with no operation of itself.
Nice.
Right? And we have applied for the EU IPO. We are registered in UAE. We are in US PTO. So it is a proper registered brand, today. And I want to create it like an ecosystem. So you call it like a franchise, marketplace, contactless car rentals, or even an aggregator. So you ask for it, and you will see Finalrentals as an ecosystem.
you see, I have two following questions, and like one of them is obviously related to the pandemic. But before we talk about the pandemic, you said something very interesting that, a time in a business that you were down to your last $5,000.
Yes.
I don't think, I think there's a lot of people that, I can tell you right now, I had that perception on my first startup as well, that, I'm going to be in technology and, I'm going to buy a Ferrari and like, you know what I mean? And I think you laugh because everybody goes through the same points, right? So, tell me, how did you pick yourself up and, go from that, almost hitting rock bottom, right? So like what happened? Like, how did you motivate yourself? How did that happen?
So when I started Final Rentals, I had around $500,000 in my bank account as my savings of 12 years of work. It was my saving, right? So I was using that money to build Final Rentals, to market Final Rentals. And when I started, I had billboards on Sheikh Zayed Road. I did a lot of, I would say, erratic marketing. I will use the word, erratic here, because it was marketing like I want to be all out, but without a strategy of what exactly it will bring me back in terms of revenue. What's the ROI? So I did not look at ROI. I looked at the marketing, like let's just go all out, right? And that was crazy on my side. I was learning, and literally when I was down to my last $5,000, I had to let go of staff. I had a big office near Burj Khalifa. I had to close that down. And then I closed Final Rentals down, but without telling anybody, because it's digital, right? It's online. Nobody would know, right? And literally I took a break. I went to Italy to my father, and I was meeting my father after 4 years, okay? So we have a small farmhouse outside the suburbs of Milan. It's called Novate Milanese, where I met him, and I spent a couple of weeks with my father. And there I realized something. I learned something about business and life is simplicity. So my father was a very simple guy, lived his life, gave us birth, education, provided us with everything. And he was a very happy person. He was happy about if there's a buy one, get one free on milk in the grocery, he is happy about it. He's happy about gelato. He's happy about little things in life. He's happy about the greenery. And I'm like, I'm 32 years old and I'm feeling so sad about this thing, which I've built, I've learned. And look at this guy. Like, can I claim that when I will be 68, I will be like him? The answer is no, right? So I learned that simplicity is very powerful. The moment you embrace, you want to be simple. You don't want to have the Hublot watch. I don't have a watch. I don't wear a watch now anymore, right? You don't want those expensive clothes and all those things. Your life becomes very powerful because now you are mission driven. Then you're hungry for power or hungry for money, right? So then when I came back to Dubai, I was a different person. I started from DTech, from Flexi Desk, and I built Final Rentals again. So I was doing all the jobs. I was the developer. I was a designer. I was a digital marketer, the SEO, the content writer, the CS guy. I did everything. And then we hired our first employee again in March, right? And then in September, Abe, I won the Gulf Capital SME Award for the best online business of the year. Nice. I beat companies like Yalla Compare, Insido, Sukal Mal, you name it, and they were there in the nomination. So simplicity is now the part of our ecosystem. Like, we are the simplest ever running company, very lean, right? 98% automated, and that's how I learned something new about technology. That technology, it doesn't have to be expensive. Like, I don't have to raise like $20 million for what? For like literally tell me for what? Until and unless I want to grow global or I have a plan. Locally, I don't need that money. So it has taught me many things, that episode of, let's say, those 2 weeks.
So you said a lot of great things, and I'm just gonna highlight a couple of things. I think that's a lesson I've learned myself. Simplicity and going back to basic, I think, is very important. A lot of people come and approach me, because I'm a startup guy, and they say, I registered my company, did this, and they don't even have a product. I'm like, why did you spend all this money? Get the product out there before you start billing people, then start registering. But just make sure there's a demand, make sure people ask for you first. And that's something crucial. And I think I've learned that, I worked for corporates in my life as well. I worked for a Fortune 5, even I would say a Fortune 5 company in the
Yes.
US, where they spend millions on marketing, and what you used, you spray marketing all over, or you carpet bomb,
Yes.
and
Yes.
hopes of people come back and stuff like that. And all of that, like, money is important once you find that product market fit, and
Yes.
then you pump money, because then you scale really rapidly, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that's something that is very important, and that's why, a lot of founders right now I talk to, they're like, if I raise $1 million, yeah, you'll sleep better. But the problem is it's that's not the problem.
Yes.
To be as lean as possible. Like my major startup was a call center. I can tell you right now, the first year I was the agent. I was the super. I took
Hmm.
my own escalation calls. You know what I mean?
Yes, yes, yes.
You know what I
Yes,
mean?
I remember we had this chat when you were on the Story Heroes. I remember, your story, and I was like, wow, man, this is like seriously, like almost. I remembered my time, like
Yeah.
almost the same thing.
And you know what? When they call it sweat equity, you know what I mean? It was really sweat equity,
Yes.
because we did everything. It would have been really not like, I worked in big call centers at that time in my life. Worked for big telcos and stuff like that. And we had a person that did quality, and we had a person that did training, and a person that
Yes.
did tech. But suddenly in my own startup, I was doing all of that. I was troubleshooting
Yes.
my own computer, and then have to interview people, and then after hiring them to train them, and the client meetings, it was tough times. I don't regret it, because obviously the company is doing really, really well right now. But those are the lessons learned. People think, I don't have enough money because I need to hire a quality engineer, and I need to. You know what? If you have the skill
Exactly.
set, you need
Yeah,
to.
do it yourself. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. DIY. I mean, like I don't want to raise money when I'm raising money just because the reason is because I need that skill that I don't want to do. If I have the skill, I should do it first, or at least build the process, right? So
Yep.
today, when we have this final rentals, a lot of people, now we have a team of 11. It's a global team, and the funny thing is that I can run this company now literally, on daily basis on Slack, right?
Yep.
And we don't miss a thing because the thing is the whole thing is built by me, by me.
Yep. Yep.
So I understand exactly you have the problem on code line number 4001. Go and fix it. That's it. It's
Yeah.
it's almost like that.
Well, that's super cool that you're that lean and that you're that global. And so let me go back to the second question I wanted to ask you about how, a lot of companies in the pandemic, you know what I mean, really founders, in my opinion, good founders, sat down and thought how they can either fix the problem or see how they can pivot. And I know you came on the show with me and the guys, the Pivotal Show and stuff like that. But I also saw a lot of founders just sit there and saying, I'll write it out. Or the craziest, extreme, where people panicked, where they fired everybody, and then they say, well, wait a second, I could have done this and could have done that. So how did that idea, because, obviously you hit rock bottom essentially in March. You had zero rentals because,
Yes,
we were in a lockdown. Nobody was even driving. Like,
exactly.
you know what I mean? I remember a funny story about cars. Is I got an SMS in March when we were locked in saying, "Congratulations, your car is paid for." And I was saying to myself that, from my bank, and I'm like, okay, here's an asset that is completely useless. You know what I mean, to me, because we didn't use it for a while, right? So tell me, how did that whole franchising, or that whole, what did you do back then?
So Jan and Feb were dream months. We had amazing number of bookings. We sold almost 10,000 rental days. It's like room nights. So I was like, it's amazing. The organic traffic was incredible, and I loved it. Right. And then came March. And from March, April, May, June, July, August, we had like almost zero rentals, or you can say at least 15 rentals. Not bad. So I was thinking, okay, I did not fire anybody. In fact, we added two more people remotely. So I learned a thing or two about how to motivate your remote team, or how to lead. So location is irrelevant, right? So I learned that lesson after like 5 years, because before I had a setup in Pakistan also. I was working remotely, but I forgot that like for 5 years, and it came back again to me that that was the reality. So then I realized that, what do I want to how much I love Finalrentals. The truth is that Finalrentals is something that has made me what I am today. Like I wouldn't be sitting here if there was no Finalrentals. It is a brand that, like a rock star has a song that everybody knows.
Yeah.
Almost like that. Like everybody knows about it and they know about me and I know about them. It's like this, right?
Yeah.
So I said, this is the brand that I want to take global, right? And then there was this news going on that Hertz was going bankrupt, that Hertz is having the cash problems. And I was like, here's this master franchisor who is going bankrupt and they have this presence worldwide, right? What's the problem here, man? They have these franchisees, they are paying them yearly fee, the franchise fee, there's a royalty on every booking.
Yeah.
What the hell is happening here? Because what kind of cost they have? I was a bit curious about that thing. And I was the person who actually onboarded Budget Rent-A-Car in UAE. When Budget came to UAE, I was the person who onboarded them. And I was 23 years old at that time, right? So I was like, where's the cost here? I don't see the cost. Like why would you go bankrupt? And then I realized that they have this lot of, bricks and mortar model. They help them, source the cars, finance the cars and all that, and insurance and all that. And I'm like, okay, that's where I come in the picture. My strength is that I'm being lean. I'm the leanest car rental platform in the world. You have cars, welcome to my platform. Here you go. So then I built this franchise model. We built a franchise kit, which is 100% digital, right? All you need is cars. You have 600 cars, welcome aboard. You can be our franchisee. In the pandemic, we built a new platform called Blade. So on Blade, you can run your whole car rental operation. You can just be onboarded and boom, next day you will be trading, right? So that's how I built this whole, or let's say turned it around, right? Because I wanted to control the CX, the customer experience. I cannot control it being an aggregator. Let's be honest. I can never control that. So the moment I become a franchisor, I can dictate my terms and all the dreams that I have about, being truly digital as car rental. Now that dream is in my pocket, because now I have contactless car rental. The tech is there. It's called Finalrentals Air, right? Then we have the Blade, right? So with Blade and Air, I become the most advanced car rental ecosystem on the planet.
Wow. And that's very, very impressive. You know what I mean? With also being that lean. So, I know you talked about, your trip to Italy, and you talked about you seeing your parents, and you know what, like, I know a lot of genuinely happy people who have just, are very simple, who keep it lean. Like, I remember because, as an entrepreneur, you also live a lean life, in all fairness, because you don't know when your next paycheck or your next money can come in and stuff like that. Tell me, what regrets have you had, if you had any? Honestly, like, something I would say I had no regrets, but things that I might have changed. You know what I mean? Like like regret is such a strong word.
When I was starting Finalrentals, I should have had that, thinking, let's learn more about jumping into a startup, like what exactly it takes, right? And I should have thought about fundraising that time. When I was in that seed area, I should call it, or a pre-seed area, I should have thought about fundraising. I should have learned about this, being an entrepreneur, as a startup tech entrepreneur. I should have learned more about that. I just didn't even think about it, and I just jumped into that, start a company and start doing it. I think that was, when I think about it now, okay, I paid a price to learn something that is invaluable. I understand that, sure. But I should have really, waited for it, because my strength was industry knowledge. I had the knowledge. I would say nobody knows the tech of car rentals as good as I know, honestly speaking, at least in the GCC, not talking about the worldwide. Of course, there are people who know this better than me, but I think I can really be right up there when it comes to understanding this industry as a tech guy, right? So I did not really use that knowledge at that time. I was a bit cocky. I had money in my pocket, and I said, you know what, I'm going to be the next Elon Musk. And that's not how it works, unfortunately. You have to bleed a lot to do that. And yeah, so I think that is the biggest regret. I still think about it, and it gives me a bit, okay.
Come to think about it, like, we're very aligned, me and you. Like, the regrets that I've had was me not accepting certain jobs, but me not doing things a certain way just because sometimes ego did get in the way, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
And you know, like I talk on the show about this. Uh, I have multiple failures as well. I've started companies that went nowhere. And I
Mhm.
think, you know, this is a topic that nobody talks about, especially in our area, especially culturally. I'm
Mhm.
not talking only about Arabs. I'm talking about Arabs, even, you know, people from, I know you're from Pakistan and India and like that whole area, you know, people get labeled, oh, this guy's a failure. But
Yes.
I think the failures is what really grounded me, what really, and how I learned how to pick myself up is I think what people, you know, need to learn to do more. I think there's nothing wrong, you know, that whole Silicon Valley fail fast is
Mhm.
there's nothing wrong with failing, you know what I mean? It's just a part of your experience. At least you know that you did it and you tried. And that is sometimes culturally taboo. And that's something we need to know. So okay. Let me ask you one last question. That's my curveball question.
Okay.
So my question to you, if you had a superpower or you want to mimic a superhero, who would that be or what would your superpower be?
I think if I want to be a superhero, I would be Spider-Man.
Okay.
The reason why, because he can crawl, he can go on top of the buildings,
Nice.
and he's very human. He's the only superhero with human emotions.
Okay.
Like he had a girlfriend, he had a grandmother, he had a family, he had a job. It was all real. He was crying. He had a heartbreak. So
Nice.
I think, I would be a Spider-Man.
Out of curiosity, because you mentioned Blade, was it Blade because of the server blades or was it because of the superhero Blade?
Well, the name Blade for our platform is because it is the cut above the rest.
Okay.
So it will cut the competition apart. That's why I came with with the name Blade.
Because that would have been a cool superhero to be Blade, like, but
Yeah,
then,
yeah, yeah.
but it's not really like Blade is such an anti-hero because he's kind of a vampire, but which is not something you want to be known as in the online field or actually as a business. But that's something super cool, and you know, I'm a big fan of these. You know, server names that are like from either shows or like, you know, the geeky ones.
Yeah,
And
yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
I remember there was a couple of them in all of the tech startups, you know, and why would you call that server name that one? You know what I mean? Like, I remember I worked with a company, they had their server farm was called, sorry, one of their main servers was called Homer because the guy was
Okay.
a huge fan of The Simpsons, right? Which again, Homer was not a big performance person. So why would you call the server Homer, right? But well, Ahmad, it was lovely talking to you. I think it was a very it was a great conversation. If there's anything you would like me to, would you like to add? I'd love to hear that. And by the way, we do have a hashtag, and our hashtag is Real Talk No Nonsense. And I think this was a very real conversation where you actually, you know, spilled the beans, as they say. So if you have anything, please, you know, give your 1 minute or half a minute's, you know, advice to our audience. I'd love that.
Well, I just would like to add one thing, that there is this notion about failing fast, and also that entrepreneurs think that they can start a startup and raise funds, right? My only advice is, if you take it as an advice, is please do not start a startup with an idea that I'm going to raise funds, or with an idea that I'm going to fail fast.
Yeah.
Think about the purpose, like why you are doing this. Why? If the answer why is credible to you, because you can lie from your mouth but your body will reject it.
Mm.
That's how it is, right? So just be honest with yourself. Have this conversation before pitching to anybody. Pitch it to yourself.
Yeah.
And when you pitch it to yourself, and if it sounds like BS, you know the answer already. So you are the best judge of your own startup, right? Once you are convinced internally and entirely, right, then you start your pitch, because the first judge of your own idea is you. I
100.
know so many entrepreneurs who lie this throughout this journey of their, let's say, seed or pre-seed, right? And then in the end, what happens, you also know about that, what happens, right? So do not build a company based on a lie. That's it. That's my own advice to you.
Very, very well said. And I agree with you. Your passion has to be there. This is another, it's like a baby that you're, you know, you're that you bring into this world, and not because, you know, tech is sexy right now.
Yeah.
Want to open a tech startup. It doesn't work this way. And also not because you have a very niche product or a niche idea that you think everybody has it. So, well, thank you very much for your time. I
pleasure.
enjoyed
My
this.
pleasure.
Thanks everybody for listening. Until next time.